This book
Yeah.
She does have it in English.
Yeah.
is about, you know, also history, but
Yeah.
still my life in Jerusalem,
Okay.
and I lived in Tiberias, and then again in Jerusalem, and I was married that time, and my husband was very good friend. They grew up together with Moshe DAYAN. You heard about
Oh,
him?
of course. He's famous.
Okay. So, fortunately or unfortunately, I got to know him, to know DAYAN, and when before I got divorced, we became very close friends, even lovers. You see?
Wow.
So,
You see? This
I knew nothing about this.
we were in relations about 7-8 years. Then we separated, but we remained still in good relations.
Okay.
Yeah?
This is during the 50s.
Yes, exactly. From 55 to 64 to 63.
Wow, very important time. Okay. Yeah, I'm interested in anything you want to say about that.
So, this book, it's not translated.
No. So, Mrs.
So I
Mrs.
read
Perlmutter
also
has a job to
about
do.
my relations with DAYAN.
Good. Yes, go ahead. You can. Can I let you tell the story?
What?
You met him in 1955 through your husband.
Yeah, from 55, and that's it. But I don't think it will be interesting to.
Well, what were you
to
doing in 1955? What was you?
Where?
In 1955, you were in your 20s.
Where I've been?
You were young.
I'm not so young. No,
Okay.
I'm not young.
In 1955, you were.
Yes, of course, much younger anyway.
Okay, so your husband and you, where did you live?
Well, I was in the army
Okay.
first. I was in the army, and when I was in the army, I met my commander, you know, the commander of the regiment.
Yeah.
Well, I got to know him, and then after I discharged the army, we became friends, and we got married with him,
Okay.
with the commander. And he was a good friend with DAYAN, and with all the, and Yitzhak Rabin, and you see,
Paris.
and
You can say that
all the big,
your husband was very famous.
Who?
Your husband was very famous also.
And what was
Well, not very famous.
what was
but
his name?
My husband? No, he's not known.
He's not known.
He's not known. Here in Israel they know him,
Well,
but not. He's not.
Don't say.
So anyway, so
so
this is just by the way I tell you this.
okay. Well, no, it's interesting because, of course, at the time, as far as I remember, the Czechs had decided to sell arms to the Egyptians, and they tried to raise money. People invested their own personal money to raise arms for Israel, didn't they?
When was it?
54, 55 at the time. The
54?
Nasser was armed by the Czech government. The Egyptians
Yes.
were being armed by the Czechoslovakia, were selling arms to Egypt. And Nasser was the new Egyptian dictator
Okay.
at
yeah.
the time. And that was considered a threat to Israel's existence because there were Fayadeen raids across the border, weren't there? They were always raiding Israel from Jordan and Egypt at the time.
Okay.
You know more than us.
Oh, I read there's a what's his name, Bar-On's book, whatever.
More about
And so, at this time, they were talking about the 1956 Suez War, when Israel and England, Britain and France decided to attack Egypt before Egypt attacked Israel. With the new arms from Czech Republic, it was inevitable that Nasser would attack Israel. So Israel attacked first. You remember 1956, October,
Yes.
after the nationalization of the canal.
Mifta,
So where were you during
the
that?
Suez operation, we call it.
Yeah, and where were you during that war? How were you out of the military at that time?
The Suez Canal, well, no. Look, I was also, first I was a school teacher,
Yeah.
and I was a school teacher in that year. And, well, not so, but after I was a school teacher, I said that I want to learn in Jerusalem. So we passed to go to Jerusalem, and I became a student. And there I met DAYAN, and he also he was also, after this operation in the Suez operation, you say canal in the.
Yeah.
He was very, very,
Famous.
Famous and a hero and.
Because it was him who took.
So I met
Sinai.
him exactly after this operation.
Okay.
He just after that he left the army. He was chief of staff that time, you see. And then after he was the chief of staff, he left the army and also came to Jerusalem to study in the university. So I also came to study in the university. My husband was also colonel in the army, so we lived together in the same house for the, you see,
Okay.
for the all the,
During the time of studying.
you know, for the all the army.
like a dormitory? No, dormitory for students or?
It was מחנה אלנבי, אני לא יודעת אם אתה...
in Allenby camp, okay.
It was Allenby camp. It was British camp for high officers of the British Army.
Okay, in Jews.
And after the war, after the 1948 war, it became. It's not camp. It was big houses and big apartments there. For the Israeli officers, high officers, you see. So my husband got an apartment there, and then DAYAN came also and got an apartment there to study in the university. That's how we met.
What did you study? What did you study?
In the Hebrew University.
But which subject?
First I studied special education, because before I was a teacher. I have a BA in I have a BA in special education, but after 3 years, I decided to go to study law. So I studied law, and now I became a lawyer. I'm a lawyer.
Okay. And
Very good lawyer.
But in that years,
yeah.
this was the days where I was, when I was a student in the university, and I was a neighbor of DAYAN.
So DAYAN, I want to ask you about his character, because about his charisma. What made him? How would you describe his charisma, or the effect he had on people? His leadership abilities. He must have shown some of that.
I see you are not a great. You think he was not?
No, I just wanted to see from your point of view. What about his personality? Maybe you could ask this question better.
No, ask it.
Demonstrated the effect he had on people.
Okay.
Okay.
It's a good question.
Yeah.
Many ask it, you know,
Okay.
because they really had very, how we say, nigudi,
Contrast or
Ma?
contrast or many aspects.
Look, it was very complicated, very complicated. He had a very complicated
Character.
character because he was brilliant on one hand, really brilliant. On the other hand, he was not very scholar. He was not, and he was intelligent, but he didn't learn much in his day. He was a student when I was a student, but he was grown as a peasant. He was grown in a moshav. You know what is moshav?
Like a village.
An agricultural settlement. He was grown.
So he wasn't very academic.
He became academic when he was, after he was the chief of staff.
Chief of staff, yeah.
But he was much better man than many other academics because he really was he was charismatic, he was nice, even with his patch, he was very attractive man.
Yeah.
And he was on one hand. Well, I didn't. To say the truth, I didn't think I'm going to talk about him.
You were the one who suggested it. It was you
I
suggested.
just find myself talking about.
Yeah. No, but he is a fascinating
No.
character.
Well, what made him? What made him? He was a special personality. There is no doubt about it.
What was special in him?
What?
What was special? מה היה מיוחד פה? שהבנות נפלו לרגליו.
Well, I'm not talking. It's not how he was to women. He liked women, but every man liked women. I don't think he's especially different from other men. Normal men.
I think the effect on men is far more interesting. His effect on men than on women, because all of these guys back then completely worship him. I don't know why, because I don't know why all the guys in the army worship him. I don't really know why.
Well, first of all, he was chief of staff. He was very good, close to Ben Gurion, and he was his position in the country, in the state, was so high that this made him very popular, and because of how he looked, how he talked, how he acted. Now they start to find that many things he said that were wrong. I don't know, but at the time he was very, very popular and very.
So if
Anyway.
you compare him to Rabin or Peres or this guy, is he more special, more interesting, stronger character?
He was not. Peres and Rabin were square near him. You see,
That's a good
maybe
point.
because he didn't go straight. You see, he didn't care to go with other women. He didn't hide his relation with me or his relations with other women. He didn't care what that people will talk about it. He made what he thought it's good to his interest and to his feelings, and that's it. And
Yes.
after.
The square point is a good point. If you look now at Netanyahu, is so square, or even the chief of staff, Gantz, they're all very, very square, very boring, very predictable. And it's
Now, he liked archaeological he liked to go to dig
Yeah.
archaeological
Archaeological
Yes.
digs.
Artifacts.
When I lived in Jaffa at that time, he found a site with beautiful archaeological things. So after he was going to dig, and then he was coming to visit me, and he made it openly. He didn't hide it, and people, let him do it. Nobody say don't do it, or you are. It's the state property. They let him do it.
So he was allowed. He was like a French politician.
The what?
Like a French politician. No scandal.
Yes.
Like Hollande or Sarkozy. No scandal. It's accepted in France. In England, it's not accepted.
Not exactly the
Anyway.
right word, no standard. Not exactly.
What do you mean?
When you say non-standard, it's like a British term. It doesn't really suit. It's not just non-standard. It's just being a free spirit, or maybe free spirit or wild spirit. Not a question of standard.
Well, what I'm saying is that there was no scandal
Maybe.
with. At the time, his political ambitions.
Don't know.
He was the sort of fellow, as you always say, why didn't he become prime minister? The sort of person who would have been popular enough to be prime minister. But he never became prime minister.
I tell you why. When he was supposed to be, he was the favorite of Ben Gurion, and then he became defense minister, and then became the Yom Kippur War, and this finished him. This was he collapsed. After the 67 war, he was admired. He was a big hero. He was the big, everybody admired him. But this was how many? 5 years? It's big 5 years.
6 years.
And then he divorced his wife, he got married again. And then after he got married, came the 73 war, the Yom Kippur War, and this was the biggest failure of his life. And even Begin made him a minister of
Foreign affairs.
foreign affairs. He was not the same. So he didn't have the chance.
So what was it about the 73 war that he got the blame for?
I'm not an expert.
In 73, his reputation collapsed. Why did he get the blame? Israel still won the war.
Why? He was in the 73 war, he was the Minister of Defense.
Okay.
He was the highest responsible for this great failure.
But Israel won the war.
Well, he was one of the biggest failure, yeah.
Okay.
You really think it?
But
You think he was one of the failure?
sure, what? Of course, there were some other big, high officers who made many mistakes. There were many mistakes in this war. But still, we didn't lose it.
No, you won the war.
Well, we were, yes, we won, but it was very, very bad win. It was very bad
Is it
victory.
because Israel was caught
Because we
unprepared?
lost so many. No, it was not a brilliant war. No, not like the '67.
I know, but when you think of it, the Arabs never won one war. They never won in 48, 56. Because 56, Israel was the only winner of the Sinai-Suez War. The only winner was
Yes.
Israel. And Eisenhower insisted they hand back Sinai.
56,
Israel
yeah, we
was the
took
winner.
all Sinai.
Yeah. 67, Israel won. 73, Israel still won. Since then, apart from the Yasser Arafat, nobody's attacked Israel, directly as a nation. The Arab states gave up after 1973, so it was still a victory. I never understood
Yes,
why.
still a victory, but it cost a very, very hard, very difficult, high price.
And so Moshe Dayan got all the blame, did he?
Yeah, he was finished after this.
He's finished. He must
This
have,
made him also sick, and he became sick, I think, because of this failure also.
yeah.
He became sick, and that's it, and died. Yeah.
So in terms of...
So if you want, I can tell you, 5 minutes to the camera, and that's it. And if you want.
Sorry?
מה, אתה מצלם אותי?
Of
עד
course I
עכשיו
recorded.
צילמת אותי?
כן, כן.
I can't believe it.
Why, it was brilliant. It was excellent.
אתה רואה אותי? מה...
Yeah, yes, it's brilliant, yes. Excellent.
אני אוכל לראות? I
בוודאי,
didn't know.
you'll get it.
No,
It's good, lucky you didn't know.
Wow, I thought...
I mean, obviously, I have a biography of Dayan at home, which by Baron. Again, I'm going to read it in a month or two. I bought it, I never read it. A short biography of him, which I intend to read. Obviously, one day, when your book gets translated into English, I'll read your book, that book.
I don't know if I will translate it.
It's Israel only popularity.
I don't know. It's very, very personal.
Yeah. Okay.
It's interesting, but this is really very different, but still there is something in common, This is my biography, and this is not my own biography.
The novel is...
Loves in the Shadow,
Yeah.
my last book, that I gave it to you.
Yeah.
This is the biography of my people, of my nation,
Yes.
of my country, of my historical past,
Okay. I'm looking forward to reading.
Even because I want to emphasize that I didn't pass the Holocaust, I was not in Europe, not my family. All my family was born here in Israel. My former ancestors came from Spain.
Yeah.
So I'm not from Europe. But still, since I lived this time, this terrible time in the Second World War, I lived it all my life. Since then, till today, I feel it very, very strong in myself. So I decided to write it, but it's not only the Holocaust, it's also how after Israel was established in the 48, yeah, and what the conflict with the Arabs in Israel and the British mandate here. And as you know, anyway, my feelings to the British, and I write it in my book, is very ambivalent. On one hand, they made a lot to us, yes? In the Second World War, they saved us from the Nazis. In the 1929, they gave us the Balfour exclamation, how is it? Yeah? And they said that the Jews have to got their homeland in Palestine, in Israel. But then came the Arabs, and the Arabs are very strong because they have the money, they have the oil, and the whole world worship them since because of their oil, because of their money. So, of course, the British wanted to give Palestine to the Arabs, not to the Jews, or they wanted to divide it between them, but the Arabs didn't want to get their share as the British state.
The Arabs
So-
wanted the whole thing.
Yeah, so we are fighting with them till today, and I don't see any solution now yet.
No solution.
Anyway, no, they will never give up, because what they want is just to get back all Israel and to make it
Muslim.
Palestinian, Muslim.
Muslim.
They want all Israel to become Muslim Palestinian. So, unless there must be any miracle that they will have any leader that will change this, but it doesn't look. Anyway, no chance.
And you're right, because the weaknesses of the religion. Under Islam, if a territory has become under Islam, under the Islamic Ummah, as far as they're concerned, it never goes back. So they conquered this in the 7th century, and they think they own it forever. Obviously, the existence of Israel is a failure of Islam, because it was a major defeat for the Islamic Empire. But if you look at the Islamic world now, it's completely falling apart in civil war and suicide. Israel gets stronger, Islam is destroying the Arab world. I don't see any change from that. I have no hope. The Arabs have no hope. Until they abandon Islam, they're finished. And until they start to copy Israel, they're finished. Even the Christian Arabs have a bad attitude towards Israel.
I'm afraid not we have this danger from the Arabs. All Europe have it.
Correct.
You know, all Europe, because
In America?
Europe wanted to get, they not wanted maybe, but they got rid of 6 million Jews. Now they got, in the vacuum that created, I think, so they got now 60 million Muslims there.
Plus Turkey.
This was the, I think, the this was the what happened because the Jews left, you know, in
Left.
but left to the, and there was a place vacuum, and the Muslims just spoiled it. They used it. And I think it's a policy from the high stages to send all these Muslims to Europe to conquer it also.
I think
To,
the Arab
to Islamize it.
Yes. I think the Arab oil money and the Saud family is very much involved in that, because they're using the Arab oil money to buy Europe. Gaddafi said Europe will become Islamic without one shot being fired. And it's happening in England now. I mean, I won't be living in England in 10 years' time because it's happening so fast. I have no wish to live in an Islamic country. But Europeans are starting to wake up to this too.
Too late.
In France, Le Pen, if she wins the election, maybe she'll kick the Muslims out. They'll just go to England. That's the problem. De Gaulle, Charles de Gaulle is to blame for that. You know, Charles de Gaulle is the man behind this Islamization of Europe.
Why?
Because Charles de Gaulle allowed the Algerians into France after the Algerian Civil War, and he hated the Americans so much, he saw that the Arabs were more natural allies to the Europeans than the Americans. He embraced North Africa and Islam in order to piss off the Americans. That's actually his strategy. He hated America. He was rabidly anti-American because Roosevelt and him never got along during the Second World War. Yes, you can read the books about it. How Churchill tried to stick up for de Gaulle when Roosevelt was attacking de Gaulle. It's de Gaulle's bitterness and his failings as French president that have made the way for the Islamization of Europe. And Kissinger in 73 isn't innocent either. Something happened in the 73 oil negotiations. But Saudi Arabia is the key country behind the Islamization of Europe. Saudi Arabia funds the mosques. Wahhabism. I think we talked about that before. So you're right. You're completely awake. You know what the threat is. It's not just Israel, it's Europe.
That's
And
right.
Israel is the only country fighting that war now.
That's the point, we are so small.
I heard in
We are-
Manchester
we
there
are-
are many Arabs.
Too many. I know many. All the Saudis, the gay Saudis, so they can have sex, they come to Manchester. There are like, I don't know how many Muslims, 100,000 Muslims in
And your
Manchester.
Prime Minister is the only leader in Europe who say openly that he doesn't like this or this Islamizing Europe. All
It's
the
true.
others still accept them.
He said that, but he also said that when that British guy was killed this weekend,
That's
he
right.
said it had nothing to do with Islam. It had everything to do with Islam. None of the European leaders will face up to the fact
How come? So why do they
because
make it?
they want to keep the Muslim vote.
That's right.
The Muslim vote in England.
You see, that's
2
how
million,
they
3
will,
million people.
that's how they will take all Europe.
And the Jewish community was under attack in Manchester this year. By
Yeah,
the
there is
BDS
also
movement.
big Jewish, yes.
30,000 Jews and growing, but the whole Jewish community was under attack this summer by the BDS movement and the Muslims. And there were people yelling Heil Hitler going down Broughton High Street, where the Haredis live. There was open anti-Semitism for the first time I've ever seen it in England. The anti-Semitism of the British was always under the carpet, but the Muslim anti-Semitism is open. Prodigals of
That's
the
right.
elders of Zion rules all across Europe. And Jews are leaving Europe now. They're going, the French Jews, 500,000, they're starting to come here. Many French Jews are probably going to England, but I don't see any hope of saving England unless they stop the immigration.
I won't like to live in Europe now. I love it. It's a wonderful place. But it's not pleasant everywhere. I've been last year to Holland, to Amsterdam.
Yeah,
Everywhere you go, you can see them, and they are very suspicious. I talked with a friend that I was with him, and we talked Hebrew. Maybe he heard. So he came and asked, "Where are you from?" And I saw that he was a Muslim.
Mhm.
He just saw. He said, "Never mind." You see, I can't say where I'm from.
I know.
Because I'm afraid. It's not pleasant to me.
Well,
Terrible.
the English Jewish community wants to fight back. I'm on the Friends of Israel Facebook, Northwest Facebook group, and they're trying to fight back now. They don't want to hide their identity. Because they're British first, but they want to be openly Jewish. And in Europe now, they can't wear a
You
lot
can't
of.
be openly Jewish.
But that's what they want to in England. They said there's no reason why we should be ashamed of being Jewish. They are starting to fight that. The problem is the majority of the English people are resigned to the Islamization. They hate it. But they're resigned to the Islamization of England because there's no leadership. There's no Churchill to save England anymore. Churchill saved England in 1939 from Neville Chamberlain. And that's who he saved it from, and from Adolf Hitler. But there's no leadership in England anymore. Everybody wants to leave. Most people will go to Australia or Canada or America. They've given up. They have no hope for England. And the young generation,
And it's irreversible. You can't ask them to go back to their countries. You can't. That's it. You can't also exterminate them also.
nobody wants to, but they will exterminate us.
They will or Islamize you or exterminate you.
And this war is a clash of civilizations. Bernard Lewis, a British historian, predicted it. The third great advance of Islam. It's been happening for 10, 15 years now, caused by, instead of weapons and crusader swords, like in France in 732 AD, when they first invaded France, this time it's through babies. Muslims are going and having babies on European welfare states. You know, in England we call it job seekers allowance, unemployment insurance called job seekers allowance. But the Muslim leaders call it jihadi seekers allowance. So you're right. Everybody in Israel is aware of the Islamization of Europe. But I don't think the Europeans are quite aware of how bad it is, because they keep burying their heads in the sand. It's fascinating. It's a big problem. It's the end of Western civilization.
You know, all my life, since I remember myself, and it's all this year, I go from one war to the other war against the Arabs against us.
Yeah.
And if it's not war, then it's
Terrorism.
to just a little small
terrorism.
battles and all the years we are persuaded by them. They will not let us getting free. We are not free here. I feel like we are in a big ghetto, you know. I'm afraid that all Israel will become a big ghetto, very easy in 1-2 Iranian bombs, and they will finish us.
That's the worst. Yeah, that could happen.
That can happen. That can happen because the Arab, all Europe, all the world, I would say, they are so pity the poor Palestinians. They see them poor Palestinians, and the Gaza, they are the poor people because they have no way to get out. But they are much stronger than us because the Palestinians are much stronger than us. Not with the weapons, but they have a very strong back. All the Arabic Muslim countries support them. We can't do to them anything because whatever. It's enough that eventually we kill the one boy. He was killed in Gaza. All the world accuse us by criminal war. Right? We are criminals because few children were killed. But so they are even they stay all the time. They say that they want to take our country. They don't want Jews here. They say that they own this land and they want to get back to it.
Well, the problem is the weakness of Israel.
So nobody say anything. You know, I'm a lawyer, and I know that if one treats another one, I want to kill you. If I will say I want to kill you, then I might be accused as threatening for murder. But when every day, for the whole years, they say they want to get rid of all the Jews, to throw them to the sea, and they want to get back all their place, all their country. Nobody say anything. And they still remain the poor people. This is really historically very, very unjust.
It's their own fault. They're poor because they're Muslims.
Because the whole Muslim countries
Are poor.
support them,
But they're
and the
poor.
whole world support the Muslim countries. So the whole world is against us.
Yeah,
And
it's true, which is why Israel should ignore the whole world. Forget the West. Trade with China. China doesn't care. trade with Japan, India. It doesn't matter. Because Europe has lost their moral standard, because America is losing its moral standard, Israel, as long as they're creative and brilliant, will have customers. Nobody wants the Arabs except for the oil. Once all the oil is gone, who cares about the Arabs? Nobody. The Muslims have never created a great civilization.
Never.
Only briefly when they controlled the Middle East in the Middle Ages and they hadn't completely taken over and converted anyone. They've destroyed Egypt, they destroyed Iran, they destroyed Syria,
Never.
they destroyed North Africa. They have done nothing but and now Israel was the first country. Now Britain defeated the Muslims in 1917, destroyed the caliphate, but Israel is the only country that's come out that's not a Muslim country. And that's what defeats them. As long as Israel exists, Islam is defeated. Israel has 500 atomic bombs. They cannot be defeated.
That's right.
They cannot be defeated. Israel has to be stronger. You need to stop being soft on a bunch of cutthroat Muslims. The Arabs here even might be a threat to your people. Even the Arabs here. But they know where their paychecks are. You just have to make sure they don't have too much power. You cannot give up this fight and just say, be defeatist. You have to say, our brains, because of our religion and our background, our brains are stronger than your brains because we study. Because we struggle for survival. The Muslims will never achieve anything. Israel will always
You know,
win.
they achieved one thing: oil and money
Yeah.
and strength and quantity of people. 22 Muslim countries. And how did you get? You know how did you get all these countries? From the
Military.
8th century.
Yeah.
They invaded to Israel first, then to the Syria and Lebanon and Iraq, and then they with the safe, with the sword.
Of course.
By
ISIS, like
sword.
ISIS. Like
Yeah.
ISIS.
Either you Islamize yourself or we kill it. You kill them. And all that countries, they fought against them. In Morocco, they didn't want to become Muslims.
Neither did the
But
Turks.
they just killed all the people who didn't want to Islamize. And that's how they got. So they left Israel hundreds of years. Palestine was almost empty. Nothing. They didn't do anything here.
True.
Hundreds of years.
Yeah.
But because they wanted to get more and more Muslim countries, so they fought all the way till Indonesia. They went until Indonesia to Islamize them.
Mm-hmm.
Afghanistan, all the Far East, almost. But after they got all these countries, only in the 19th century they saw, what's that? The Jews are coming. They are building settlements. They didn't like it. All that years it was very few small settlements of Arabs, nothing.
Mm-hmm.
But when the Jews started to come from Russia and East in the 19th century, so they were so small, not too many people here. So then they started to bring Arabs from Syria, from Egypt to the south, and then that's how they became, a bigger population, Arabic population here. If the Jews won't come, they also won't come.
Sure.
Nothing would happen. But when they saw that the Jews are coming and building the country, so they didn't want them to come. And since then, about only 130 years that they are fighting against us, that they don't want us to stay here.
Of course.
They don't mind, they don't care about the Jewish history here, they don't care about the Bible, they don't care about the kings that ruled here. More than 1,000 years, Jews lived here, and in a big kingdom, it was big kingdom. But and they don't care about the starting of Christianity.
No.
They don't care about Jesus and all the other, nothing. They say whoever is not Muslim has no right to live. You see, but the only conflict there started about 130 years, and now because of this, now they say that we took their land from them. What do you mean? We took them from. Palestinians never started to be called Palestinian only from 1967. Before that, they were just Arabs.
Syrians.
Who called
No.
them the Palestinian? The Jewish people. Not their themselves.
Maybe the Jews started to call, no. You know, after the 67, when the Arafat came and said that he wanted to, you know, that they want to become an autonomic land after the 67 war, then he said we want to have our own land for the Palestinians because
Where he was born,
this was what?
Arafat.
Arafat, yes.
Wasn't born in Israel.
No, of course not.
Egypt.
Anyway, no, but
He
there
was
were.
born in Egypt.
Yes.
Arafat's an Egyptian.
Yes, he was not Israeli at all, not
And if you
Palestinian.
go back to 1920, the Arabs who lived in this area called themselves South Syrians.
Yes.
That's all they called them. And in 1948, the Arabs were going to chop up Palestine and it would disappear. It would be Jordan, Egypt, Syria, nothing else.
You know, if the Arabs would win in the 1948, there won't be Palestine to the Palestinians.
I know.
Why? Because 7 countries fought against us, the Jews. They wanted to exterminate the Jews, to take all Palestine to them. To whom the Egyptians would take all the south of Palestine. The Jordanian would take what they took, Jerusalem and the West Bank, and the Syrians would take all the Galilee. So they were annexed to their countries.
No Palestinians.
So there won't be Palestine at all. But since so we help them, you know, we help them by this, you know, to get to have this argument that we took it from them. From whom did we take it? It was British mandate before the war.
Well, the
It
argument,
didn't belong to them at all.
the argument you should be making is that the Arab Palestine is Jordan. Because Jordan is 70% of the British Mandate of Palestine.
That's right.
The argument that your country's leaders, all leaders in Israel, should be making is that Palestine's two-state exists. It's called Jordan. And that it was intended that the Jewish state would be Western Palestine, and Winston Churchill created the Arab state of Eastern Palestine. That was the original intention in 1922. So that the Arabs wouldn't put a claim
Right, yes.
onto Western Palestine. That was the first land for peace, 1922. But the Israeli government does not speak well for the Israeli people. It does not stand up for the Israeli people. It does
No.
not spread the truth. It does not open, and they should ignore Abbas. I would arrest Abbas. I would take that young boy, that young Palestinian boy who spoke English, Arabic, and Hebrew, and said he was a proud Israeli, and I would make him the head of the Palestinians. That's what I would do. I would arrest Abbas and say, I will only negotiate with Hussein, not Hussein,
Abdullah.
Abdullah, and the other Abdullah, and nobody else. Because it's Saudi Arabia and Jordan and Egypt.
That's right.
It's them. Syria doesn't exist anymore. Iraq doesn't exist anymore. They should forget these Palestinians and just negotiate with the Arabs. But the Arabs cannot beat Israel. Israel is more powerful than you think. So I think it's about time that Israel did a John Wayne.
But
Instead of being the Alamo.
What about the Palestinians? What do you do about them? In the West
They have a choice. They can
They
leave
are
the
not
country.
Palestinian, they are Arabic.
The Arabs. What do you do
They have
about
a
them?
choice. They will either be loyal to this country or you can pay the money to leave. There's a man named Martin Sherman who writes for the Jerusalem Post who has said the humanitarian solution is to pay them money to leave, to go to, and then they would be rich Muslims in another country instead of poor Muslims here. After all, their great-grandparents didn't exist here. Some will stay, and look, they've done well. Tel Aviv, the Arabs do well. They don't run around in burqas or beards. Much better than the Arabs in Manchester. This is like a European city. That's what they have to say. They have to say, we'll pay you money to leave. But if you're going to stay in this country, because Israel is Judea and Samaria and Jerusalem, it's an Israeli city. We allow Muslims to come there and Christians, but it is Israel. And because what is Israel? Israel is Jerusalem. In the movie, Cast a Giant's Shadow, the guy who's pretending to be Ben Gurion, the actor, he says the whole point of it is Jerusalem. And he tells Kirk Douglas to get the trucks in there to Jerusalem. You remember that movie?
Yes.
With Frank Sinatra and the plane. The point of this country is Jerusalem. And to be honest, the Israelis they let themselves down because they're not proud enough. They should be saying, look at our country, it's paradise. Look at your country, it's a disgrace.
I agree with
I really,
everyone.
I appreciate so much.
I'm sorry.
what you say. I'm very.
But you should be asking your politicians
I'm
to
proud
say that.
of you and of your opinions and what you say.
I'm sorry I
Not
cut you
too
off.
many say that. You know, I have a friend. What is friend? He's a writer, a Dutchman. Wonderful man, wonderful. But he wrote a book, and now I write a new book, and we are talking about the same. We write about the same. He just published his book about a woman, Dutch woman in the 19th century, that came here to build a house for Jesus to come when he comes to the land, and she was very rich, and she wanted to build a house for 145,000 people to welcome Jesus when he comes to the land. And she started to build it in Jerusalem, and it's a fantastic story, you know.
Wow.
And
It's a real story?
what?
It's a real story?
Yeah, sure. And the building, it was in the Ottoman, in the Turkish. The Turks had a very stiff laws for the land laws. That foreigners couldn't buy land. It has to be very complicated. Anyway, she built it, and then started the war in the Balkans, and she went to the Balkans to fight, and she was like Jeanne d'Arc, they call her. But because they were very, very poor people, they didn't write about her, and they didn't. So this man, this friend of mine, he wrote a book about her,
Wow.
and he wrote it biography, and I write about the same story. I write it as a novel.
Okay.
So it will take me some good months to finish it. Anyway, still, he's informed. He thinks that the Palestinians are poor people, and that they didn't get their own country, their own, But maybe he doesn't really understand the history of the place. He sits there in Netherlands, and he hear all the propaganda of the Muslims, and he doesn't care about the Muslims in there. So we discuss it, but that's why I say about my new book. Yeah, this will be very, very interesting also. But
Well, I'm looking forward to reading the book you've given me. Very much so.
but, excuse me, in this book that I give you, in this book, there is a chapter about the 1948, only 4 battles that we lost them. Or we lost some battles in the 48 years. The old city of Jerusalem, the Jordanian took it, and all the Jews had to leave it.
Mhm.
And then in Latrun, it's near Jerusalem, there was three very difficult battles, and we lost it. So the Jordanian ruled, that's how they closed the way to Jerusalem.
Yeah.
We couldn't just say it was a miracle that we found another way to get out of Jerusalem. They didn't let us use this entrance to the city. So we lost it. Then in the Upper Galilee, we also almost lost all the Galilee.
Wow.
And I wrote about this battle. That finally we got it, we won it, but it was very difficult. And I just chose the 4 battles that we didn't take it, we didn't win, and we did. So, and this all around, I write all around this period of the conflict in the war, the 48 war, and before it, and all the siege. I've been there in Jerusalem. I will never forget this time. There was, we got very little bread and 2-3 eggs in a week, and the water was also very shortage in water. And it was, now I see it as an interesting.
3 months, wasn't it? The siege?
3 months.
Yes. I have a diary by an English writer of the siege of Jerusalem. I haven't read it yet. I ordered it from Amazon last year. Harry somebody wrote it, who wrote for one of the British papers. And I will read that. It's about, they came from Tel Aviv up to Jerusalem, and they got trapped there for the siege for 3 months.
Yeah, many wrote about. You can. It's endless. Like, to write about the Second World War. I think thousands of books were published, and they said, "What do you write about this? So many books have been written."
Everybody's account is important.
Is what?
Everybody's personal account is important.
That's right. And you can, I think you can write another 1,000 books, and every book will be different from the other. Yeah. There are so many points of view, so many personal stories. But I wrote about the personal stories of other people. You see?
Yeah. Okay. I'm looking forward to that.
And the story that pushed me to start to write it was really so fantastic that I said I must write it. So I built on it all the history of the Holocaust and the war and everything.
So you mostly write now. Writing is your main occupation now. Writing books.
Well, I wrote 6 books.
You continue writing.
And now I continue writing. I think I have to finish one more. That's it.
No, maybe more.
Well,
life is long. You never know.
Look, I'm not a professional writer.
I know, but every book is important. The more you write, the better. Because you have a unique thing that you saw in life, and that's a period that today's young generation don't know. If you write a book about it, it gets published, the younger people might read it. They need to know about the past.
That's it.
And new books remind people of the past. So you should continue writing for many years and write as many books as you can.
Well, first I want to finish this. I wrote about this Dutch woman because she was in Israel.
Yeah.
She came here and she was part of the history of, she was here. And it's fantastic story. So I say I must. Not Jewish, and she was very, 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 she wasn't married, she didn't have children, she was married to God, that's what it is. So all around it, it's fantastic, the history of Israel in that time, of the 19th century. Very interesting.
It is a fascinating time, actually. There's a very good book on the 19th century called Bible and Sword by Barbara Tuchman.
About what?
There's an American writer, she's died now. Bible and Sword, Barbara Tuchman.
Barbara Tuchman.
Yeah. It's a very good book, worth reading one day. I wanted to ask you though.
Who wrote Traveling? Mark Twain.
Mark Twain, yes.
Yes.
He wrote about.
You mean this?
I've read what Mark Twain had to say about.
Fantastic.
About Jerusalem and Palestine at the time. He said it was a wasteland. A wasteland.
Fantastic. Yes.
Yeah. And it was in the papers that it was happening. Okay, the Holocaust was happening. It was in the papers, but it was on the last page.
Unbelievable.
It was on the last page, and this is Jewish-owned papers. The New York Times. They hid it at the back. Ben Hecht, the man who wrote Alfred Hitchcock's Notorious, with Ingrid Bergman and Cary Grant, and also wrote many famous movies like His Girl Friday with Charles MacArthur. Ben Hecht was one of the few American Jewish writers who tried to highlight people about the Holocaust. He had Claude Rains that appeared in this play. People from Claude Rains were appearing in this play.
They all have guilty feelings.
Roosevelt was awful. He was awful. And Churchill, very pro-Zionist, very pro-Jewish, but surrounded by Arabists. He was not a dictator. A boat of Jews is trying to get out. The British are trying to find a way of sending them back to Germany. Anthony Eden was an Arabist. The Churchill was surrounded. He was the last person defending English civilization, because if he hadn't been Prime Minister during the war, if he died in 1942, having saved England, at least keeping England in the war, more Jews would have died. It would have been worse. He was the only one in Britain, maybe Harold Macmillan, who had that sympathy for Israel, and because Attlee was terrible and Ernest Bevin was terrible. But there were people. There've always been Michael Gove, who was demoted in David Cameron's government, is very pro-Israel and wrote a wonderful book on the whole clash of civilizations that we're involved with. Michael Gove actually wrote about this. Are you okay? Sorry.
Sorry, it's off.
And but people. People are sticking their heads in the sand. They were sticking their heads in the sand in the 1940s during the Holocaust. Now we have another Holocaust happening in Europe, but it's happening in a different way because Jews are being told to leave Europe. They're being driven out by the Muslims and by indifference of the actual Europeans, and also by the Europeans are tired of being accused of being guilty about the Holocaust, so they said, now we can say what we want about the Jews. The Jews are leaving Europe. And it's never happened on this scale. Another Holocaust is in the works, mostly centered on maybe Iran bombing Israel, and nobody cares. Nobody's learned the lessons of history. Ultimately, that's the thing. Nobody's learned the lessons of history. I, as a person who was born 10 years after the Second World War ended, I was born when Churchill was Prime Minister for the last time. I can't face that. My parents fought the Nazis, and now the Nazis are winning, but not out of Germany, out of the Middle East. The Nazis, then the Nazism got passed on. The baton of Nazism was passed on by Adolf Hitler over to our friend al-Husseini, and he took it into the Middle East, to Nasser and all those. And that's what we're fighting, the same clash of civilizations. What I'm wondering, I want you to go back to 1942 when you were young, and I want to know what Jews in Israel, how they perceived, how they looked at the Second World War, and how anxious they were about it as they were watching it happen. How close did they realize they were to destruction?
The Jewish population in 48 was 600,000 people. This was the population here, and the Arabs about the same.
Mm-hmm.
I think a little bit less, about the same. So the Arabs didn't. Well, I don't think the Arabs didn't. Were not afraid, because they knew the Nazis will not touch them. But the Jewish population were scared about it, because the news was saying how the Nazis the German army is getting took Libya, they took all the North Africa, and then I know that Rommel, he could win. You know why he lost the battle there? Why the British won and they let them withdraw and not to come to Israel? I read it because Rommel lost many soldiers were killed, and he asked Hitler to send him
Relief.
more soldiers,
yes.
more people, more soldiers, because he didn't have enough soldiers to continue the fight. And Hitler told him, you are strong, you can do it as you are, I don't send you any more soldiers. And this was, of course, we saved for this, but that's how they lost it, because he could not continue to, and the British were strong. So they, but before, when the German took Libya and took the North Africa, and we thought that they will took Egypt. They were very close to Egypt, and then to Israel. And I know that it was very, very frightening and very concerned, and they were afraid that they are going to finish us. That's what they would do. And the Arabs, they had the Mufti, they had a very big religious leader that was very close to Hitler, and he supported all his plans to exterminate all the Jews in Israel. Mm-hmm. They were sure, the Arabs were sure that the German will come here and they will get rid of all the Jews and they will get all the country for themselves. So this was between us and the Germans, between us and the Arabs. But the history said no.
The Battle of Stalingrad is going on at the same time. When Al-Alamein is being fought, Stalingrad is being fought.
Yes.
So Hitler couldn't relieve anybody from Stalingrad. That was fortunate.
Right.
But the Second World War was a lot closer than people thought it was. A lot closer. Just because we won the war doesn't mean it was inevitable. It could have gone the other way. And it would have been a disaster for this country the other way. Because the Arabs were all ready to back the Germans. They just couldn't deal with the British tanks, you know what I mean? only in 1944 did Saudi Arabia, Iraq, I think Syria, they joined the war on the British side. Only Jordan before 1944. So during the First World War it was the same thing. Most Arabs fought for the Ottoman Empire, most of them. In the Second World War, most Arabs would have fought for the Nazis, but the British had the military power.
Yes.
British military power was underrated during the Second World War. It was actually quite huge, and British military production. But no, it's interesting. So it was quite terrifying to grow up in those times, was it?
Sure, terrifying.
Do you remember what your parents said about this? Your mother and father?
About
In
what?
what time?
Well, during the war. Yeah, when you were young.
In the
Second World War,
in
yeah.
the Second World War?
Yeah.
Here in Israel, look, I didn't feel it.
Yeah.
I didn't feel anything. Not now. Well, my family was quite wealthy.
Mm.
Many people had no money to buy food, but we were okay. My grandfather had a big house, and we lived with them, and we didn't feel anything. I know a cousin of mine. She enlisted to the ATS. You know, it's the British woman section. It was in the British Army. By the way, many Israelis went to the army, to the Jewish brigade that was with the British Army, you know. And my cousin, when I was little girl, and I so much envy her that she was going to the army. They sent her to Egypt, and but as a girl, I didn't feel anything, you know. I went to school.
So not much was known. Not much was known about the Holocaust.
About what, the Holocaust?
Not much was known back then.
No, in the time of the war, even here, I don't know. We didn't know exactly what's going there.
Yeah. Okay.
Here we didn't know. I think even the leaders didn't know exactly what's going. Only at the end of the war we started to hear what happened, but I didn't know anything. But after the war, I studied. I was sent to learn in a agricultural school, you know, in Halal. I went 3 years. I was in the interior, you know, in the cultural school, and immediately after the war came all the youngsters, the young that lost their families, but the survivors came and to stay there in this agricultural school. So this was the first time that I met all the stories, some of the stories of them. And this was really very traumatic and we didn't know anything, and now they come and somewhere in the partisans, somewhere, you know, even in the concentrated camps, they came from there. They were shocked, they didn't talk much, you know, but since then, I started to live this time of the Holocaust. Every year here there are so many. Every year when the Holocaust Day, you know, we see all the movies and everything, and I really was so touched about it. And I'm a lawyer. Why I became a lawyer? Well, because I'm very concerned about really justice of the world, and this was so unjust time what happened to my people. So I said, I just waited to the point how to express all my feelings and all my knowledge and all my opinions. So that's why I wrote this book.
Fascinating.